Hey everyone, it's Jill and Harvey here again for another one of our reviews. As promised, we are doing the newest in the X-Men franchise, which is X-Men Apocalypse. And as you can see, Harvey really doesn't like being up here, so I'll let him go and we'll finish the review, we'll get his thoughts a little later. Okay, buddy, you're free. Once again, spoiler alert is in effect. So if you continue watching this, it's your own fault if you get spoiled. But before we get into the actual details of our review, let's start with a quick overview of the plot. So first off, we should say that this film takes place in 1983, 10 years after the events which were shown in X-Men Days of Future Past. With Wolverine changing the past in 1973, we now have an alternate timeline where the events of the first three X-Men films never happened. And we're kind of grateful for that. But before we completely dive into what happens in 1983, we see the events of the ancient past, about 3600 BCE in Egypt, where our main villain, Apocalypse, rules as a god over the people there as the first mutant. He is surrounded by four other mutants who are his chief followers / bodyguards, and we see how he's become so powerful as he is able to transfer his consciousness into the body of other mutants, not only making him immortal, but also allowing him to gain the ability of the mutant that he possesses, along with retaining the abilities he already had. Kind of broken, we know. Anyway, during one of these transference rituals, we see that the people of Egypt rise up against Apocalypse, killing his horsemen and trapping Apocalypse in the collapsed pyramid, where he is now in a state of suspended animation almost. So fast forward to 1983, where the events of 1973, where Mystique has saved the president from Magneto, have led to mutants being generally accepted in society, and Mystique herself is now seen kind of as a folk hero to mutants everywhere. However, while they are generally accepted, that doesn't mean that they are always, treated well. Meanwhile, we have, Charles, he is continuing to take in students at his School for the Gifted, including Jean Grey and their newest admittance, Scott Summers. While Mystique, she is traveling the world, saving oppressed mutants like Nightcrawler, who has been forced into an illegal caged fight. And finally, we have Magneto, who has decided to try his hand at living as a human and has taken on a wife and now has a daughter. Anyway, these three former friends are all brought together once again when Apocalypse is awakened once more and moves to cleanse the world of the weak, i.e. humans. Apocalypse enlists the help of a young Storm, Angel, and Psylocke to form the basis of his horsemen, and he amplifies their powers to new heights. We also, and when Eric's new family is actually murdered by the local authorities who are trying to take him in, he too joins forces with Apocalypse as the fourth horseman. So Charles telepathically tries to reach out to his old friend, but puts himself in the sights of Apocalypse as to be the next body that he is going to take over, wishing to have Charles's ability to control the minds of others. So Apocalypse and his horsemen, they roll up to the school and kidnap Charles, leaving Mystique, Beast, and the other students not only to deal with an explosion that destroys the entire school, though the perfectly timed arrival of Quicksilver makes sure that the only casualty is Havoc, sadly, but also Stryker, who shows up and demands answers, as well as the possible end of the world via Apocalypse's hands. So we have a few scenes at Alkali Lake, which is the base that was in X2, where Jean, Scott, and Nightcrawler allow an unstable Weapon X, i.e. Wolverine, loose, to wreak havoc and allow them to, rescue their friends. So Apocalypse uses Charles to send a message to the people of the world about the destruction he will wreak upon the earth so that only the strong will survive. But Charles not only changes the message, but sends Jean a secret message as to where he is being held. So, long story short, the team of Mystique, Beast, Jean, Scott, Nightcrawler, Quicksilver, and Moira McTaggart go to save Charles and stop Apocalypse. At first, it looks like all is lost, with Apocalypse and his horsemen just being far too strong. But in the end, Charles is rescued, minus his hair, which gets kind of destroyed during an attempted transference ritual. And Psylocke is defeated, and Angel is killed, while Storm and Magneto switch sides. Yet they are still unable to defeat Apocalypse. Only when Jean fully embraces her power as the Phoenix are the mutants, with a combined effort, able to defeat our villain. So in the end, the world is left to pick up the pieces of all the destruction that was wrought before Apocalypse was stopped, while the mutants return to rebuild the school. Once again, Charles asks Eric to stay, but he declines, and in the end we have Raven and Beast training a new team of X-Men made up of Jean, Cyclops, Nightcrawler, Storm, and Quicksilver. Yet, we also get a post-credit scene, which shows us some members of a shadowy group known as the Essex Corporation, picking up some of Weapon X's blood that was left behind at Alkali Lake, which, leaves our story open to the possibility of a Wolverine clone, such as the character X-23. So, first impressions. Was the movie entertaining? Yes, but only superficially so. This film, it's visually stunning, has some really cool segments and fight scenes, and it also has some actually pretty likable characters, and the people at Fox obviously know how to cast. As, I was really happy Storm had her accent. Yay! So where does this film fall apart? Well, that would be in the pacing, plot, and its horrible tendency to shoehorn in unnecessary subplots and characters. So let's start with the pacing. Now, this movie is about close to 2.5 hours long, and sometimes it really feels it, as we are constantly being introduced or reintroduced to new characters, several of whom technically don't need to actually be in the film for the plot to unravel in the exact same way. But I'll get to that in just a moment, when I discuss the whole shoehorning aspect of this film. So, as for the plot, I should point out that this story, or at least this version of it, is not one that can be found in the X-Men comics. I mean, yes, there is an Apocalypse, and yes, he has 4 horsemen, but their storyline doesn't play out as the same as it does in this movie. Now, technically, this shouldn't be a problem, but because, movies are always, taking bits and pieces from different storylines to make a film. The issue I have with this plot is that it is a rehash of several storylines from previous X-Men films, more specifically X2. Hell, there are even literal scenes ripped straight from that movie into this one, such as when Charles is using Cerebro and showing how he can see all the humans represented in white and all the mutants represented in red. Also, we have the same danger of Charles being able to gain control over every mind in the world, but this time, instead of using Cerebro, we have Apocalypse threatening to take over Charles's body and amplify his powers to use his gift. So there are also a bunch more parallels to X2, such as Stryker taking the mutants from the school prisoner, and the battle at Alkali Lake, and even the beginning of Jean as the Phoenix coming to save the day. But let's move on to what I think is probably the biggest problem with this, which is the shoehorning. For those of you who don't know what I mean when I say shoehorning, basically what I'm saying is that the people at Fox slipped in characters and subplots into this movie for no good reason, other than to have, more cool mutants to draw in audiences, hetero up their leads, and force unnecessary, character motivation. So the first offender in this category is Magneto's family. The only purpose his wife and child serve was for them to die and to give him the motivation to join Apocalypse. But in all honesty, had the writers just, had Eric be in hiding, he still believes that mutants are the rightful inheritors of the Earth, so he would have probably joined up with Apocalypse anyway. Overall, it just feels like it's a classic case of fridging women in order to further a man's plot. Other characters that technically didn't need to be here include Jubilee, who only had a handful of lines, if that, and we never even got to see her use her powers. So, and technically, she also shouldn't even be there, as she's supposed to be about 10 years younger than the team that has Jean and Scott in it. I also feel like the only reason that they showed this character was that, her character design is very recognizable, as a lot of people who grew up watching the 90s X-Men cartoon remember her and like her. Plus, it gives Fox some, so-called diversity credit. Or at least it would have if they'd actually used her and didn't just use her as a prop. Really, it's such a shame. I would have liked for her to have played a bigger role if they were going to use her at all. Scott also technically doesn't need to be there. I mean, he really plays no role in taking down Apocalypse, or much else for that matter. Yes, he blasts open the door to help people escape from at Lake Alkali, but they obviously probably could have found, a different way of doing that. So once again, while it was cool to see him, ultimately he was unnecessary. So speaking of Scott, this brings me to a scene I both love and unfortunately hate. That scene being the one in which Quicksilver saves the entire school population from an explosion. How this is connected to Scott? Well, that would be through his brother Havoc, / Alex, who in this movie appears to be older than him, which is different from the comics, who he attempts to stop Apocalypse from kidnapping Charles by using his powers. Unfortunately, he ends up hitting the Blackbird plane, triggering said explosion. So the scene that follows shows Quicksilver, saving everyone, and it's so much fun. It's, they're not only blasting one of my favorite songs, Sweet Dreams by the Eurythmics, we get to see Quicksilver, thinking fast as he appears to move at a normal pace while everyone else is, including the explosion actually, are in super slow-mo. Yeah, it's a trick they've done before, but it's still fun. I thoroughly enjoyed watching the scene, but the more I thought about it, the more it bugged me. Because, once again, it was completely unnecessary. The villains didn't cause this explosion, Havoc did. And, being the only one who got killed in the blast makes his death all the more irritating, as he basically kills himself. He doesn't get a hero's death, he gets a Darwin Award. And that ain't right. Now, I really do love Quicksilver in this franchise. He's cool, he's fun, he's cute, but that doesn't take away from the fact that beyond this completely fabricated scenario, he has no real role in the grand scheme of things. I mean, the main reason that he even comes into the fold, which is to find Eric and tell him that he's his son, he never gets around to doing. He kind of just gives up, which is sad. Now, the last instance of overt shoehorning would be the Charles and Moira romance. I mean, it's nice that they are addressing Moira's taken memories from first class, but still, after Charles gives them back to her, her reaction is pretty bland and understanding, plus nothing else, we're not shown anything to come from it. We don't see these two characters after the scene interact. So why all the build-up with Charles appearing to be pining for her, other than just to hetero up this movie, especially as we see Eric switch sides during the fight against Apocalypse after having a series of thoughts that don't focus on his dead wife or child, or even Raven, but solely on Charles. Finally, my last criticism on this movie is either the mistakes or missed opportunities with the characters. Now, unlike the characters I just mentioned, these ones are supposedly necessary to the storyline, but don't, pay out the way that they should. So, first off, I really, really hate this whole the Phoenix is part of Jean thing, and not an alien entity like it is in the comics. By ignoring this origin, the producers are cutting out all the alien storylines that they could be diving into. So what we do get instead is another movie about how humans and mutants can't live together in peace. Let's kind of move on. Second, can we talk about for a minute, what a missed opportunity it was for the other three horsemen? I mean, Psylocke, Angel, and Storm seriously didn't get the attention that they deserved, as they only really had a handful of lines and were mostly just there to, look cool. I also have to ask, what was the point of, bringing us Angel / Archangel if you were just going to kill him off? And why is Psylocke apparently still evil at the end of this movie? I'm pretty certain that she's a hero. I'll admit I'm not as up on my X-Men as I should be, but I'm pretty certain she is. Anyway, it sounds like I'm being pretty negative about this film, even though I did enjoy it at the time. Harvey, help me out here. You know, say something positive about the movie. Come on. Yes, Nightcrawler. Yes, he was pretty awesome. He looked great, he sounded great, and it was just lots of fun. Huh? Is he Mystique's and Azrael's son like in the comics? I have no idea. They never addressed it. I mean, it is possible, as while she's played by Jennifer Lawrence, we know that Raven can look much younger than she actually is. Though, to be honest, I kind of doubt it. Yeah, that makes me sad too. Anyway, the one thing I do want to point out that I did like about this film was the theme slash parallel of subverted racism in the movie versus our society. In this new timeline, mutants and humans live in this fragile state of coexistence, where mutants are not openly discriminated against, but there is still a rift between these two factions. Raven even makes a comment on this, basically stating that just because they aren't at war doesn't mean they are at peace. The fear slash dislike that humans have for mutants is now just hidden. Just kind of like how, racism hasn't been wiped out, as people are still racist, just usually not to people's faces. Unless your last name starts with a T and ends with a rump. Anyway, we could talk a lot more about this film and its themes, but it's probably best that we just leave it here, otherwise we'll be here all day. Once again, I hope you enjoyed this review, and remember to like and subscribe to No World Slackers for this show, our lore shows, and so much more. Once again, thanks for watching, subscribe, and we'll see you later. Bye.